My name's Jeff Groberman, and my family's been in Vancouver for over 60 years. And while other people move around, real Vancouverites never leave home. But this program isn't about me or them. It's about Vancouver as seen through the movie camera lens of my Uncle Sid Groberman, my late father's older brother, who started taking movies as a teenager in the early 1930s, at a time when most people were barely mastering a brownie. Through his film, you can watch a town called Vancouver grow into a city, and 4 generations of his family grow up. This is his story. This is his city. This is Uncle Sid's Vancouver.
Picture of my grandparents and their family. It must have been around the 1900s, early 1900s when this picture was taken. This one is my father. That's Morris. Do you want me to come down? This one here is Charlie. This one is Abe. This is the oldest sister. Her name was Charna, who was married to this fella, Isaac Kay. This was the youngest daughter, Edie. This was my grandmother. This was my grandfather. This was the second youngest son, Meyer. This one is Mendel. This one here is the second oldest daughter, Ellen, and this one here was Janie.
Barney's not
Barney
there.
is not
He
born
wasn't born
yet. The boss of that family, without any doubt, number one was my dad.
Well, he was a dominating force. I never remember being afraid of him, but he certainly commanded and received a lot of respect because he deserved it. He was a true patriarch in the real sense. He was the patriarch of the family. He ran it, and he was demanding, and he was very successful in holding the family close together and in controlling the family.
He went into the second-hand furniture business and worked at that for many, many years till he got a stake, and then he finally started buying new furniture from the factories, and he built up a fine business in the new furniture business. After many years in Calgary, I would say he was after about 13, 14 years in Calgary, 12 years maybe. He decided he wants to go back to England. Things looked pretty good and things were getting pretty rough in Canada. So he decided he would go back to England. Took the whole family, sold out, and went to England. Stayed there about 2 months, couldn't stand it, back he came. But they came back. He didn't come back as a poor man. He had a few dollars then, and he could start up the business that he wanted to without struggling. And he went back in the furniture business and built it up into a bigger business. And that's the way we all wound up, the boys as they grew up, all wound up in the business. I was born in Manchester, England, April 1st, 1911. Now you know what April 1st is. Don't associate me with that. My oldest brother was 4.5 years older than myself, so naturally, when I was 5, he was 9. The difference between 5 and 9, he felt like an adult and had very little to do with me. And as he got older, when the others came up, the spread was further. So my oldest brother was more or less not as close with his brothers as I was, because the age difference put him in a different category. He mixed with older people, he was in school at higher grades and everything like that, and he figured that, well, us guys stay in the background, don't spoil his act. But he was a good-natured guy, very popular at school, a good sport, and well-liked by everybody. He finally got married to a beautiful girl, and eventually they had 3 boys. There was Joel, Herbert, and Stephen. My brother Jack was a year and a half younger than I. And at about the age of, I'd say of 7 or 8, he got sick and he had infantile paralysis, which left him with a little bit of a limp. Jack was a good-natured kid, do anything that you wanted. He had a terrible temper if you aroused him. But he was a very good boy. He got married and he had 2 boys, Leslie and Huey.
Yeah.
The next brother was Alfred. Alfred was, let's see, about a year and a half, 2 years younger than Jack. He got married in Vancouver and Calgary.
He was the Katzenjammer kid.
He was a guy that was, I'd say, could tell more lies than anyone. And he was quite convincing.
Fibs.
As a matter of fact, he still tells a few. But he went to school. He was a devil in school. When I was going to high school, I used to play hooky, not by the day, but by the week. And he found me at home one day when my parents weren't around, and he went down and reported me to the principal. He was a lot of fun. He wasn't a bad kid or anything, but he was just a little mischievous, that's all. Alfie's kid's name, the son is Barry, and the daughter is Cecile. Cecil was the youngest. Cecil had to do as he was told. If we had a chicken in the house, Cecil would get the part that was left. The 5 of us boys, when we were around at home, I'm going back a little bit now, we were always at home for dinner, the 5 of us boys. My dad, we had a lovely home. My mother had 2 maids at the time. She had to, because she had to have 1 maid to look after the other on account of the 5 boys. So, but we were always at home for dinner, and we always were dressed neat. Today is a different day of dressing.
Different
coming
kind
back
of
to the
dressing.
present day is the way my boys dress, and that's a way of life today. Went to school with a tie on, and we went to work with a tie on. It's a different ball game today. However, I think it's more relaxing today. Cecil had 2 children. He had a son, Jeffrey. He had a daughter, Hildy. Jeffrey was the oldest of the 2. But the family was very close together. The boss of that family, without any doubt, number 1 was my dad. They looked up to my dad on account of him. They'd ask him advice for certain things. And another thing, they liked to come to our house because my mother was a good cook.
I'd visit them when I went to Calgary. So I got to know them, Abe particularly, because Abe and my father became good friends. Mind you, Abe and Barney were good, my father and Barney were good friends. Barney was the best man at my father's wedding.
We took a trip to Vancouver. We drove to Vancouver. Once we left Banff, there was no pavement. And we got to Cranbrook the same day. Cranbrook to Spokane one day. Spokane to Seattle one day. And a half a day from Seattle to Vancouver. And an orchard was a novelty to us, to see anything growing apples. Never saw anything like that, so we stopped. My dad would say, stop, you stop. And he'd get out and he'd want to pick an apple. He'd never picked an apple in his life before. So the whole family got out to pick apples. Well, you're in a daze when they came here. It was so different. Ocean for one thing, vegetation, the buildings were bigger. We came from a smaller place. We were big time when we came to Vancouver. There was the Woodward store, there was Spencer's store, there was the Hudson Bay. It was like coming to New York. And the main attraction to us was the beach. And of course, we would go to Victoria. We would go over to North Vancouver, see the mountains. Everything was different. It was just beautiful scenery. And as I got older, I used to come out here to go to the races. They used to have 3 tracks here. There was Lansdowne, Brighouse, and Hastings. And each one would have a 2-week spread, and then go back again to it. We'd go to the races. My dad loved the races, and I used to go with him. We had our business in Calgary. My oldest brother was married, and there was 4 of us other boys. And my dad decided that he would have to make plans for his family to have more scope in business, in the furniture business, than we have, to expand. And he wanted to go down and live in Toronto. That was my dad's favorite place on account of business, because he was all business. He didn't look at flowers or beaches or anything like that like we did. His whole life was business. He loved business. And he wanted to go to Toronto because Toronto had a fair population, and he could have bought out a chain of stores there that would have kept the whole family going, because he realized as we got older and got married, we were going to have more scope than Calgary. So we were deciding on Toronto, and then we looked back at Vancouver and decided that the weather in Vancouver was so moderate and beautiful that we just loved it. We would sacrifice some business for living in Vancouver. I think that coming to Vancouver added years to my dad's life because he just loved every moment that he lived here. We all decided to come out. My dad came out and he looked around and he bought a home. He bought a home on 6070 Granville Street. It was so much money. He walked into the house. He liked the house. These people wanted to sell it in the worst way. And my dad said, how about the furniture and everything in the house that goes with it? Other than your personal belongings, dishes, cutlery, everything, pictures, everything but personal things that they said we'd sell the whole thing. So my dad says, how much do you want for it? They said they'd want so much for the whole thing and they'll walk out, they'll take their clothing. We didn't actually need the furniture because we were in the furniture business here. My brother was in the furniture business. But this way, my dad says the dealer bought the whole thing.
The furniture was very nice.
It was nice, otherwise he wouldn't have bought it. Yeah. He came out here, I came out, Cecil came out, Jack came out, and my mother and father came out. We all had a place to go and live in this house. There was very little that we had to buy outside of something to eat. and a few linens that my mother wanted to buy. But he bought the house lock, stock, and barrel. Cyril got married about 5 years ahead of me. I wasn't married then. Then we came to Vancouver, and within a period, I would say, of 4 to 5 years at the most, the rest of the boys got married. I went around with my wife for 5 years before I got married.
He was a blind date.
I was always a cautious one, and I wanted to make sure. As a matter of fact, I tell her quite often today that if she hadn't rushed me, I'd have been ready today to get married. So
I asked him for what? You ready for what?
But my mother, bless her, she used to say, "You're going around with a nice girl." She says, "It's not nice to go around so long." It was a matter of, she put it to me not quite as blunt, but you got it on or off the pot. He opened up a furniture store on Hastings Street in between Woodward's and Spencer's. And things were a little tough. We're just getting out of the Depression then. And there was a lot of unemployment. We used to sell furniture, $1 down, $1 a week. So we used to have a staff picnic. They used to be around, we used to tell the staff to bring their wives and children or some of their friends, and there'd be about 65, 85 people go on this picnic. And we'd supply the food, and they'd supply their way to get out there. Used to go to Balcarra Park. We'd take there was a little boat that they used to have that they, down near where the fishermen come in, and that boat used to go back and forth to Balcarra Park. I think it was $1 return or something like that. Between Hastings and Carroll, up to Woodward's. From Woodward's to Granville, that was the busy part of the town. Property was worth so much an inch in those days. You couldn't get a vacancy. On a Saturday, Woodward would put on a 99-cent sale. You'd have to walk on the curb to walk down the street to get it. It was so busy. There was a certain amount of unemployed, and then later there was a lot of unemployed. So the unemployed got together and they seized the post office. They seized the post office, the whole works them, and then no one could get in or out of it. They kept them in there, they wouldn't leave it, and finally they needed food. People would bring food down, but the other people would try to stop them from delivering food to these people who were unemployed. Finally, they went around to all the stores, they got so desperate, for collection to get money for food. They went to every store up and down Hastings Street, and those who wanted gave them. We gave them. We gave them our donation. They thanked us. They went on to the next store. Evidently, with what they collected, they didn't receive enough money. The next day, they went down Hastings Street and they broke every store window except ours. All of Woodward's windows were knocked out completely. All the stores next to us, on each side of us, were cracked or broken. There was glass laying around, you couldn't walk at all. They didn't touch ours for a simple reason. I feel that the word was out, these guys at least gave us something. But they smashed every window in Hastings Street.
Yeah, then we bought the
Then
house.
we bought a house. As she was pregnant, we wanted a home, so we bought a home on
47th and Cartier.
47th and Cartier. 1391 West 47th. I paid for that house $5,800. We had both our sons at that home. I have 2 boys. We had 2 boys. Pearl had 2 boys. I got to be careful what I say.
He had a headache.
There was
He had the backache.
Larry and Harold. Well, when I was taking pictures, people were standing in front of my camera, it was a movie camera, and I might just as well have had a still camera if I didn't tell them to move. So I had everybody wave. Those who would have walked, they would walk kind of sheepishly in front of the camera. They didn't know how to, it was a new deal. The city in the 30s was, compared to what we came from, was a metropolis. It was just getting over depression then. Well, they started building the new Vancouver Hotel. They built the Marine Building. They started building other office buildings around town, and the place started getting bigger and bigger all the time. They built the Burrard Street Bridge first. They built the Burrard Street Bridge, which you have a picture of, and that was a beautiful structure, and it still is, and it still satisfies the traffic today. But we would take a little holiday as they got older, and we'd go over to Bowen Island. To go to Bowen Island, we would take the ferry to go to North Vancouver, drive all down West Vancouver till we came to Horseshoe Bay. Then there was a little ferry there, carried maybe, just sat side by side. It's called the Sani. It used to carry, and it cost you 50 cents a person there, 50 cents a person back. That was the only a little tiny thing it was. If the weather was rough, you didn't go to Bowen Island.
Yeah.
Bowen Island was a wonderful spot. You used to be able to get a cottage over there. It was owned by the Union Steamship. And they would rent cottages for $25 a week, $25 a person, with all the food that you could eat, and it was served beautifully, and it was absolutely a wonderful spot.
I learned to swim there, so we went there from about the time we were, say, 6, 7, up until the time we were early teenagers. And I enjoyed it up there, particularly the weekends, because the booze cruise used to come up from Vancouver. They called it that. It's where Lady Alexander used to get the partying types on it. And they'd come up and they'd have a dance right near the wharf, and hanging around there on a Saturday night was really an education, a lot of action, a lot of fun.
And that's where we used to go every summer, to Bowen Island. My recollection was that the people were quite worried about it. They weren't so worried about the war until Japan got into it. Then, being on the coast, Vancouver was very worried about the war. They had all types of ideas, which they possibly were right about. They created guards. We went into a blackout. Everyone was supposed to have blackout curtains. Turn the lights out, had blackout curtains. They formed an army of what they called ARP, the Air Raid Precaution. At nighttime, different neighbors would patrol their area. I had a flashlight. They give me a metal helmet and a band, ARP, and anyone that walked up and down the street, and if anyone you saw any light coming through a curtain, or you knocked on the door and you told them. It was, when you think of it right now, it sounds unreal. But
it was scary.
They were afraid of being invaded here. In Stanley Park, they set up a gun emplacement there.
The one thing that I do recall is that I think we were in grade 8 at the time. We'd only be, say, 13 years old. They were getting us ready. Imagine 13-year-olds, which is really astonishing. They issued us little uniforms, khaki pants, a little tunic, a hat, and they had us form up in platoons. They had training as far as marching was concerned, how to march, how to stand at ease, how to stand at attention, how to take commands, how to give commands. And they were getting us ready for war at the age of 13.
But it was a scary time. There was rationing also at that time. They rationed gas, they rationed groceries.
Butter?
They rationed butter, they rationed liquor. And we used to get coupons to go and get what we wanted from the grocery store. That's how they handled the war in those days.
And then, obviously, the war came to an end in the spring of 1945 when I was in grade 8, and one day they just collected up our uniforms and it was over. The family began to drift apart on the death of our grandmother, and then really drifted further apart with a lot more momentum after the death of our grandfather in, I think, 1957, something like that. Our grandmother died in 1947, 46. And then with that, we only got together at perhaps a bar mitzvah or a wedding or something like that.
As we progressed and we got older and our families got older, we looked and we could see that we'd have to go on our own because we were having children. We have to look forward for them like our father looked forward to us. And we decided that we would sell the business out. At least one would come and say he'd want his share. He wants to go into another business, and the other one, and we finally agreed on what we would do, and we sold the whole business out to our entire satisfaction, and there was no arguments after it was cleaned up, and there was no battles.
It's rather a unique experience to be able to show you a family's metamorphosis over 60 years and see 3 generations growing up in one city. Uncle Sid started taking moving pictures in the early 1930s when he was still in his late teens and continued to take movies until recently. I'm sorry to have to tell you that less than a week after we filmed the interview in his backyard, he died suddenly.
He was terrific to me from the time he knew me. He always treated me and made me feel as if I was special. I never can remember going to see Sid where it did not appear that he was glad to see me.
Although he's gone, the images he's recorded of the city and the family he loved will live on. I'm Jeffrey Groberman. Thank you for watching Uncle Sid's Vancouver.